As I said, it's a really great honour to give this lecture. I grew up in a home where choice was really ever-present, that's a word I would use. My very young parents were exactly the kind of consumers in the 1960s for whom choice was created. I vividly remember being sent to find old copies of Choice, or not so old copies of Choice, to help them make, they're old now, copies of Choice to help them make consumer decisions and to help them maybe settle discussions that they might have been having. I suspect in our household, Choice was more valuable than an encyclopedia. Perhaps Choice had already started warning naive consumers about the dangers of encyclopedia salesmen. And so it's particularly humbling to be giving a lecture named after Ruby Hutchison, one of the founders of Choice. These days we talk a lot about innovation and social entrepreneurship. And Choice is an organisation that has been fulfilling its mission to inform consumers and to advocate their interests for more than 50 years. And it's done that on a financial model of a social business. So that makes Ruby Hutchison not just an innovator, but also one of Australia's first and earliest social entrepreneurs. I too want to acknowledge, we need to turn that off. I too want to acknowledge John Wood, another forebear of this event. As you've heard, in the mid-1980s, John was the director of the Federal Bureau of Consumer Affairs, and he worked very closely with the Australian Federation of Consumer Organisations, which was the organisation which is now known as Consumers Federation of Australia, the peak body for consumer organisations. And John and AFCO, as it was known, were looking for a way to promote consumer rights, to get them on the agenda, higher up the agenda. And they had this idea, they particularly wanted to get the attention of the Prime Minister. So their idea was to create an annual consumer policy lecture and invite Bob Hawke to give it. Oh, I'm going to need this in a minute. So John proposed that the lecture be called the Ruby Hutchison Memorial Lecture. And partly that was because she was one of the founders of Australian Consumers Association, the publishers of Choice magazine, later known as Choice. But another reason, rumour has it, is that she was distantly related to Bob Hawke, the Prime Minister, and that was thought to help persuade him to come on the job. So we have here a photo of the Prime Minister at the Ruby Hutchison in what looks like maybe a less salubrious venue than here. Who's to say? And a young Robin Brown, who was then the chair, I believe, of AFCO, is sitting next to him. And Robin is in the audience today. So I later knew John as a member of the Council of Choice. My career in consumer advocacy had taken me to a job at Choice in 2005. And one of my first tasks was to help Peter Kell, who is also here, who was then the CEO of Choice, to breathe new life into this lecture series. So it's kind of a little bit weird that I'm here today giving the lecture. But thank you, Peter. Around this time, Peter also led Choice to do more work than it had in the recent times on sustainable consumption and ethical consumption. We introduced the Green Buy, the Best Green Buy, the Green Best Buy, get my language right, the Green Best Buy, and we also did research around things like labour conditions in the toy industry with Amnesty International and evaluated green power providers along with the Total Environment Centre. So that experience and related ones at Choice was one of the influences on me when I worked with other people to set up Ethical Consumers Australia a few years after I left Choice. As Delia said, the purpose of Ethical Consumers Australia is to help consumers make consumer choices that align with their values. Our major project, as Delia also mentioned, is a shopping app called Good On You, and I'll talk a little bit about that briefly later on. But I'm really delighted that not only are a few members of my family here, including my mother's sister, but also a good number of people who are supporters of, volunteers with, or staff at Good On You. So, after that lengthy introduction, to tonight's question: can consumers buy a better world? Can different shopping choices lead to substantial reduction in harms to humans, the environment, and animals? Well, as we know, household spending is more than 50% of economic activity. It varies from country to country. So, if consumers want to, they certainly have the market power to influence how goods are produced. And survey after survey says that consumers want to act. Nielsen, for example, in 2014, published a 60-country survey that suggested this, that consumers are willing to put their money where their heart is when it comes to goods and services from companies committed to social responsibility. They suggested that something like 55% of people were willing to pay more. And they also suggested not only what consumers say, but some impacts in the market. They cited figures that showed increased sales for products with sustainability claims on the packaging, or for companies who marketed their social responsibility efforts. Whoopsie. But are these social responsibility efforts really making a difference? What about the fact that there are 20 million people, maybe more, working as modern-day slaves in our supply chains? Just a few weeks ago, surf clothes label Rip Curl admitted that parts of its winter range were made in factories in North Korea, even though they were labelled China, made in China, where conditions are truly appalling. And what about the ongoing loss of biodiversity caused by pollution, land clearing, and climate change? And what about all the other harms that flow from the way we create goods and services? Clearly, social responsibility has a long way to go. So, is it hopeless? Or is change just beginning? I believe that we need a new framework for thinking about this problem. One that is based in thinking about consumers' rights, not just the rights of humans, not just the rights of workers, or future citizens, or of animals. So before talking about that more, I want to take a little tour through the past and present situation in relation to what we call ethical consumption. So variously, we call it ethical consumption, sustainable consumption, conscious consumption, responsible or socially responsible consumption. None of these labels are really satisfactory, but we're stuck with them. What we mean, though, is consumer choices that go beyond the value for money equation, where the chooser is thinking about a concern for others, their impact on other people and other things. As Delia mentioned, it's not new. Consumers have been voting with their wallets for more than 200 years at least. The Atlantic slave trade was one of the worst atrocities in human history. The consumer action was part of a successful campaign to abolish slave trade. In the 1790s, more than 300,000 English consumers boycotted slave-grown West Indian sugar. And a few decades later, the US Free Produce Society was also working against slavery. As well as boycotts, they set up alternative distribution systems for freely produced goods. And now a different problem. In 1911, a deadly fire in a New York garment factory killed hundreds. It also galvanised the union movement and civil society to take action. One result was stronger safety laws and better enforcement. But another was the incentive for campaigns to empower consumers to prefer products made from unionised factories. And then in the 1950s, the pioneers of the fair trade movement got going. They wanted to empower consumers to combat poverty by choosing freely produced goods. Fairly produced goods, sorry. So in these examples, we see different ways to respond to injustice. There's consumer action like boycotts, positive buying campaigns, new ways to produce and distribute goods. And there's civil society campaigns for changes to the law and enforcement to direct the problems directly, to affect the problems directly. And these, in my view, are often complementary. Sometimes go hand in hand, sometimes reinforce each other, sometimes are appropriate alternatives. Okay, so let's fast forward to today. There's no doubt that ethical consumption is growing. We see here ethical spending in the UK, which has been tracked, unlike most other places, it's been increasing for 15 years, something like 300%. There are now more than 3,000 fair trade products available in 125 countries. Fair trade sales have been growing at 15% per annum, and they've reached $7 billion globally. There are now nearly 500 labelling schemes that guide consumers towards more responsible products. In 1978, there was only one, the Blue Angel scheme in Germany, and it was new. And consumer boycotts are common. There's at least 59, in fact there are exactly 59 last time I looked, listed on one ethical consumer site. And businesses are responding to consumers' concern about where our stuff comes from. There are many opportunities for business. Goods that make ethical claims can often be sold for more. And ethical positioning may help increase the business's market share. But there are also risks. There's no doubt that brands fear ethical scandals. And boycotts are often embarrassing and effective. A few examples. Nestle adopted a no deforestation policy just 8 weeks after boycott calls. And the US clothing manufacturer Fruit of the Loom reopened a unionised factory in Honduras and paid millions of dollars in compensation. And then Zara abandoned the use of animal fur in response to a boycott campaign. If you don't know, Zara is the biggest clothing business in the world. In the last few years, many businesses have started working to both reduce their risks and look for opportunities. For example, a number of major retailers have started working to both... Sorry about that. A number of major retailers are imposing sustainability requirements on their suppliers and ethical requirements. And some have introduced or announced new ways to provide meaningful information to their customers. And they include overseas Walmart, Marks & Spencer, Whole Foods, and in Australia, David Jones and even Coles to some extent in some categories. These initiatives are often genuine and welcome. But when they are simply bolted on measures to business as usual, they may not have so much impact. Rarely do companies adopt a fundamental change to their business model that is based with sustainability and ethics at their core. There are, of course, a few exceptions. And so, what about consumers? Well, most of us say we want to act on our ethical concerns, a much smaller number actually do so. Collectively, our heart is in it, but the gap between what we say we'll do and what we actually do is wide. The truth is, while the value of ethical purchases is growing, it's still a drop in the ocean. Fair trade sales may have hit $7 billion annually, but coffee sales alone worldwide exceed $80 billion, 10 times that. And only 2.5% of Australian investments are now put into core ethical and responsible funds, although that is growing quite rapidly in both Australia and the US. What's going on? What explains this gap between what consumers say they want to do and what they actually do? Well, Australian specialist research firm Mobium suggests that consumers fall into a number of groups. The vast majority of us are concerned about sustainability, all except that little bit on the edge, the laggards. But only about 15% of us are actively and regularly acting on our concern. There's a much larger group, 39% according to Mobium, who are concerned enough that we feel conflicted when we don't act on our ethical concerns. Let's think about this for a moment. What we're saying is 40% of Australians are not happy about their shopping. To some extent at least, the market is letting down 2/5 of the population. Is that what we want? Can't we do better? Can't we do better for these consumers? But you might say, if so many people are upset about the things they buy, they feel conflicted when they buy stuff, why don't they just buy different stuff that doesn't align with their values? Well, as Kermit the Frog once said, it's not easy being green. Whoopsie. Complex markets and long supply chains often mean the ethical choice is the hard choice. Consciously or unconsciously, we're always making trade-offs. We make trade-offs between things like performance, style, quality, features, whether it's cool, and of course price. And as responsible consumers, we also want to buy products that are consistent with our values. But this is an also, not an instead. It's rare to be faced with a simple choice between a responsible product and an equal product in all features except for its responsibility. Second, we don't always know what we need to know. Do we know all of the ethical issues that matter in a particular product category? Do we know which companies are implicated in child labour or implicated in the destruction of Indonesian rainforests? And how can we work out whether it's better to use responsible palm oil or to avoid palm oil altogether? But it's not just a question of information. This is really important. We also hold incorrect beliefs about the effectiveness of responsible choices. Many people believe that cleaning products don't work as well just because they're green. And many people believe that responsible investments will necessarily perform worse than the market or other investments. We need help to guard against misconceptions like this. And then there's the question of it being inconvenient or impossible to find acceptable, responsible options. Where can I buy a product that gets the balance right for me between my practical concerns, the features I want, and my values? And why can't I find that easily in mainstream stores? For many people, if it's not in Coles or Woolworths, it doesn't exist. And finally, consumers are uncertain. They're uncertain if their individual choices will really have any impact. Paul Burke, doing research at UTS, has shown that it's crucial for ethically minded consumers to know that a particular choice actually makes a difference. So to summarise, before people can make responsible choices, they need to be aware of the issue and how important it is. They need to have a way of knowing and believing that a particular option is better. They need to have a convenient way of finding products which are both responsible and meet their other needs. And they need to have some way of being assured that their choice will make a difference. So where does this leave us? And us means us as concerned citizens, but particularly consumer organisations and those responsible for consumer policy. We all know that the purpose of consumer policy is to advance consumer welfare. And we've heard that a majority of consumers want to do better when they shop, but they face steep barriers doing so, and they feel bad when they don't do it. As consumer-focused organisations, it's our job to knock down those barriers. And it's not enough to just provide information. It's not enough just to challenge misleading claims, as important as that is. I believe we need to think more broadly about the rights that consumers are entitled to. As many of you know, there are 8 consumer rights recognised by Consumers International, the global peak body for consumer organisations. These include the right to information, the right to choose, the right to safety, as we've heard, and they're all important for consumers who want to make responsible choices. But in our globalised, information-rich world, these 8 existing rights don't go far enough. Canadian philosopher Mark Kingsmill tells us that material purchases have lost their role as the fount of fulfilment, at least in developed societies, to be replaced by psychological well-being. The desire to live a life that minimises harm to others is hardly new. But the number of people who now have the capacity to do so is increasing all the time, because our other needs are often largely or wholly met. I believe we need a new way of thinking that takes seriously the aspirations of the millions of people who want to consume responsibly. I believe that we need to recognise a new consumer right, the right to consume responsibly. We need this new right to do justice to modern consumers' aspirations, but it will also be a tool to help the work of the organisations whose job it is to stand up for consumers and to promote consumer welfare. The right to consume responsibly offers us a lens to assess policy proposals. It can help us evaluate corporate action, and it can stimulate the creation of new tools to help consumers. Think about the current proposals that would criminalise investigations into systemic cruelty to animals. These are particularly aimed at industries like factory farming. Or the recent proposal to make it illegal to promote boycotts on environmental grounds. Policies like this offend against the right to consume responsibly. But happily, there are other laws that promote transparency and thus help make the right to consume responsibly a reality. In the UK, the Modern Slavery Act requires a company to provide information to report against its plans to eliminate slavery from its supply chain. And there's a similar law in California. And the right to consume responsibly can guide corporate action. We don't stand for companies that hide defects in their products. We don't stand for companies lying about their compliance with emission standards. Who owns a VW? More and more, we don't stand for companies that won't tell us what's going on in their supply chains. A corporation that respects the right to consume responsibly will be transparent about their suppliers and how their products and services are made. They'll ensure good practice in their supply chain. But where a corporation fails to provide meaningful information to their customers, the right to consume responsibly provides grounds for criticism and potentially, as we've seen in the US, UK and California, grounds for regulatory action. And what about consumer organisations? The right to consume responsibly should inspire us to find new ways to help consumers. And Delia has stolen this one, but Choice's fight to put the free back into free-range eggs is one example. And Ethical Consumers Australia has created Good On You, which is a shopping app designed to help consumers act on their desire to shop responsibly. Currently limited to clothing, footwear and accessories, we've rated about 900 brands and a few more every week. We've given them ethical ratings looking at the brand's performance on labour rights issues, the environment and animals. But the app is not just a mobile list of naughty and nice. The app helps the user in practical ways. It helps you find the closest store to buy products from the brand you're looking at. It suggests better ranked brands that match the user's preferences. It empowers the user to send a message directly to brands that they care about, to ask questions, and it helps users find good deals on better rated brands. Remember that consumers like a bargain on their responsible choices as well as their other ones. At Good On You, we believe it should be just as easy to know how well a product or brand aligns with your values as it is to know the price. As we've seen, using consumer power to create change is nothing new. But modern technology creates new opportunities to obtain information and new opportunities to create new ways to share that information to empower consumers. Governments and the UN are using drone technology to monitor deforestation and pollution. And several NGOs have separately set up projects to empower workers in factories to report poor factory conditions. And some of the head brands that are contracting with those factories are using these systems. We began tonight by posing the question, can consumers buy a better world? We heard the claim that 55% of consumers are willing to pay more for ethical products. And we looked at research that found a majority of Australians want to buy consistent with their values. But we also found out it's not that simple. There's a wide gap between consumers' intentions and what they do, and there's a large number of people who feel unhappy about that gap. Consumers want to make choices. They want to make choices that match their values. This desire is closely connected to our search for a fulfilling life. And consumers have a right to minimise the harm they cause and to maximise the good they create. And I've called that right the right to consume responsibly. If we don't recognise and act on this right, we're not listening to millions of consumers who want to shop with a clear conscience. If we do, each consumer's individual action will add up to a force that accelerates change and makes the world a better place. My question for you tonight is, what can you do to help consumers exercise their right to consume responsibly? Thank you.